wind howled over the foothills of Whisper Ridge, carrying the scent of dust, pine, and something quieter, something like grief. The old truck groaned up the dirt road, its rusted frame bouncing over potholes as it neared the sanctuary's main gate. Caleb Winslow sat stiff behind the wheel, jaw clenched tight, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. In the back seat, Harper didn't move. She hadn't spoken since the crash. Not at the hospital, not at the funeral, not even when the social worker gently told her she'd be going to live with her grandfather, a man she barely remembered. Now, 10 years old and hollow-eyed, Harper clutched a worn sketchbook to her chest. Her mother's locket rested just beneath her collarbone, a cool weight against her skin. She didn't look out the window as the truck rolled to a stop in front of the barn. Caleb exhaled sharply. "We're here, kiddo." No response. He got out, boots crunching gravel, then opened her door without ceremony. "Come on, I'll show you your room." Harper slid out slowly, gaze cast downward. The sanctuary stretched out before her. Weathered fences, wide paddocks, the distant shapes of horses grazing under a gray sky. She followed him up the porch steps and through a screen door that creaked like it hadn't been oiled since the 80s. "Bathrooms down the hall, kitchens to the left, your room's upstairs. I'll let you get settled." He paused, scratching the back of his neck. "You need anything, I guess you'll let me know." She didn't. She simply nodded once and climbed the stairs, backpack hanging off her shoulder like a second shadow. That night, the storm rolled in fast. Lightning tearing across the sky, thunder booming like cannon fire. Caleb stood in the barn, checking latches and tossing fresh hay before the worst of it hit. As he reached the last stall, a sudden shriek of hooves made him freeze. Midnight. The black Mustang stood thrashing in the far paddock, kicking at the rails, his nostrils flared, eyes wild. Rain started to pelt the tin roof, and Caleb's heart pounded. Midnight had been rescued from a government roundup 6 months earlier, brought to the sanctuary after attacking 2 handlers and nearly crushing a transport tech. The stallion hadn't let anyone touch him since, not even Caleb. Then he noticed a flash of movement near the fence. "Harper?" he breathed. She was barefoot in the mud, her nightgown soaked, hair plastered to her face. But she didn't flinch as Midnight pawed the ground a few feet away. Her hand was raised, steady, small, open. "God Almighty," Caleb muttered, stepping forward. But he stopped himself. Midnight had frozen, sides heaving, ears twitching forward. Slowly, the stallion lowered his massive head, nostrils brushing Harper's trembling palm. Lightning cracked again overhead, but neither of them moved. Caleb watched from the shadows of the barn, the storm forgotten. Something passed between them in that moment, something ancient and wordless. Not control, not submission, recognition. Harper didn't speak. Midnight didn't bolt. For a long, suspended breath of time, they just stood together. 2 beings who had every reason to run, choosing instead to stay. The next morning, Harper sat cross-legged just beyond Midnight's paddock. Her sketchbook balanced on her knees, a stub of pencil tracing the slope of the stallion's jaw. Caleb stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching her through the screen. He'd woken early and checked the cameras. She'd gone back inside after the storm, quiet as a ghost, never woke him. But something about her was different this morning. Not livelier, exactly, just less far away. Midnight stood nearby, grazing. His eyes drifted to Harper occasionally, ears flicking, but he made no move to leave. He was watching her the same way she was watching him. Caleb took a slow sip of coffee and muttered under his breath, "Your mama would have known what to say." He hadn't spoken to his daughter in over 3 years before the crash. Too many arguments about parenting, politics, and the way he'd run the sanctuary with an iron fist in the early days. She'd gone her own way, become a gentle soul who taught trauma-informed horsemanship to kids in Denver. She'd written letters. He never replied. Now her daughter was here, silent, fragile, and drawn to the one animal Caleb himself didn't dare go near. Maybe that was the point. Later that day, Caleb sat with the sanctuary's intake files spread across the kitchen table. Midnight's folder was thick. Reports of aggression, vet records, the horrifying description of how Wyatt Langston's men had used ropes and electric prods to break him in. Caleb clenched his jaw as he flipped through the pages. No wonder the horse couldn't trust a soul. A thump from the porch broke his focus. He stepped outside and saw Harper crouched again near the paddock, sketching. Midnight stood no more than 10 feet away. "Kids got no fear," he murmured. Or maybe, he thought grimly, maybe she just knows exactly how much it hurts to be afraid. He didn't call to her. He just watched as the sky began to turn orange and Midnight, for the first time in weeks, laid down in the dirt, right there, in the open, with his eyes half-lidded and Harper's pencil still moving. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, the photo of his daughter in hand, one he hadn't looked at in years. Her smile reminded him of Harper's, back before it vanished. "I'm sorry, Em," he whispered. "I wasn't there. For you. For her." A creak on the stairs made him look up. Harper stood at the landing, barefoot again. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him, then padded quietly over to the fireplace. She pointed to the photograph. "That's your mama," Caleb said softly. Harper nodded once. Then, slowly, she sat down on the rug beside him. She opened her sketchbook and turned it toward him. It was a drawing of Midnight, not wild or fierce, but calm. Still. Peaceful. She pointed to it, then tapped her chest. Caleb's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said, voice rough. "I think he feels it too." They sat like that in silence, fire crackling beside them. No words, no need. Outside, Midnight slept beneath the stars. Inside, Harper finally leaned against her grandfather's shoulder. And neither of them ran. Morning sunlight spilled across Whisper Ridge, softening the sharp edges of its worn fences and rusted gates. In the paddock, Midnight stood still as a statue, ears forward, tail flicking slowly. Just outside the rails, Harper knelt in the grass with her sketchbook open and a stub of pencil dancing across the page. She'd been there since dawn. Caleb watched her from the porch, arms crossed, coffee growing cold in his hands. This was her rhythm now, up before him, silent as ever, sitting with that wild stallion like it was the most natural thing in the world. Midnight no longer paced or charged at the fence. Instead, he hovered near her like he was waiting to be seen. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the morning calm. Caleb turned as a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. A tall woman stepped out, sunglasses on, hair twisted in neat braids streaked with silver. She moved with purpose. "Still too damn stubborn to text," she called as she shut the door. Caleb's mouth curved slightly. "Good to see you too, Lena." Dr. Lena Carter had been a friend of Emily's, a therapist who'd studied equine trauma long before it became trendy. She approached the fence quietly, her eyes sweeping from Harper to the stallion. "That the one?" "Midnight," Caleb said. "He used to charge anyone who came close. Now he's her shadow." Lena took off her sunglasses and folded her arms. "She's not training him. She's giving him space. There's a difference." They watched as Harper ripped a page from her sketchbook and slid it between the fence slats. Midnight stepped forward, his hooves crunching the dry grass, and sniffed the paper. He backed off, but not far. He didn't spook, didn't flee. "She hasn't said a word," Caleb murmured. "She doesn't need to," Lena said. "She's already speaking his language." The next few days passed in quiet patterns. Harper took to walking the fence line with Midnight, her steps mirroring his. She didn't speak, but she'd begun to hum, a quiet, tuneless sound that drifted across the pasture like wind through pine needles. Lena stayed at the sanctuary, watching, taking notes, talking with Caleb late into the evenings. "She's mimicking herd behavior," Lena explained. "That's how wild horses build trust. One matches the other's movements. It's called co-regulation." "Looks like magic," Caleb muttered. "It's not magic. It's presence." One night, Caleb climbed into the attic and pulled down an old box labeled Emily. Inside were her journals, dusty but intact. He read long into the night, stopping at a line underlined in bold strokes. "If anything ever happens to me, promise me Harper will have horses. She won't heal through words. She'll heal through connection." His throat tightened. He closed the journal gently and stared out the window. Harper was sitting near the barn with Midnight again, her head resting on her knees. Neither of them moved. 3 mornings later, a white government truck pulled up. The logo read Mesa County Animal Control. A young officer in a too-clean uniform stepped out, clipboard in hand. "You, Caleb Winslow?" "Depends who's asking." The officer cleared his throat. "We received a complaint about a dangerous animal on your property, Mustang stallion named Midnight." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Who filed it?" "I can't disclose that, sir, but if the horse shows any further aggression, the county will be forced to intervene." "You mean put him down?" "I mean remove the threat," the man said carefully. "We're here to do a visual check today." Harper had walked up during the exchange. She stepped between the officer and the paddock without a word, eyes locked on his. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Caleb's voice was like gravel. "You can stand right there and look, but you don't go near him and you don't talk to her." Midnight stood on the far end of the pen, watching. Calm, curious. Not a hint of the violence described in the complaint. The officer hesitated. "He seems fine." "He is." The officer lingered for another minute before walking back to his truck. "We'll be in touch." Caleb waited until the engine disappeared down the drive before turning to Harper. "Langston," he muttered. "Had to be him." Harper didn't respond, but her fingers curled tighter around her sketchbook. That night, thunder rolled low across the mountains. The air turned heavy and still. Caleb double-checked the barn locks and fencing, already on edge from the visit, but he hadn't expected the flash of lightning to send Midnight into a full-blown panic. The stallion reared inside the outer pen, shrieking, striking the rails hard enough to crack them. Blood darkened one leg where he'd caught a nail. The rain started to fall, cold and sudden. Caleb grabbed a lead rope and bolted outside, but Harper was already there, barefoot, drenched, and walking straight into the storm. "Harper," he shouted, "get back inside." She didn't stop. She stepped into the pen, mud squelching beneath her feet. Midnight circled, nostrils flaring, hooves lashing at the air. Then Harper did something no one expected. She sat down, right in the mud, cross-legged, calm, and she began to hum. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even a song, just a thread of sound, soft and steady. Midnight slowed. His wild breathing softened. Step by step he approached until he stood over her, shivering from fear and rain. She reached up, hand trembling, and laid it gently on his neck. The storm faded in Caleb's ears. All he could hear was that fragile hum, and the soft exhale of the horse who should have run, but stayed. Inside the barn, Caleb dried off the stallion's cut while Lena wrapped Harper in blankets. "She's not just healing," Lena said. "She's guiding him." Harper sat curled on the couch, her sketchbook on her knees. She turned a page and began drawing again. This time, she sketched herself. Not sitting, not hiding. Standing beside Midnight, hand on his mane. They were the same height. Caleb didn't speak. He just sat beside her and watched the pencil move. Slowly, he placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. And outside, under the dripping eaves, Midnight stood beneath her window, silent, still, and unafraid. The morning after the storm, Whisper Ridge was cloaked in silver mist. The mountains stood like quiet sentinels under the weight of low clouds, and the air carried the smell of wet earth and pine. Harper was already outside, boots squelching in the muddy ground as she walked the paddock's edge. Midnight followed her like a shadow. Caleb watched them through the kitchen window, coffee in hand. The girl barely spoke, but she was healing. And so was the horse. The bruises life had left on them both were deep, but something was changing. They weren't hiding anymore. They were reaching. He stepped out onto the porch just as a sharp honk cut through the stillness. A sleek black car rolled up the gravel path, tires flinging small stones. The doors opened before the engine stopped humming, and two men in suits stepped out. "Mr. Winslow," the taller one called. "We're here on behalf of Mr. Wyatt Langston." Caleb felt his stomach turn to stone. "What the hell does he want?" he growled. The man held out a folder. "Mr. Langston is asserting ownership of a Mustang stallion currently in your possession. Our records indicate the horse was never formally transferred to your care through legal channels. That horse was surrendered after nearly killing two of Langston's handlers. Be that as it may," the man replied smoothly, "he intends to reclaim the animal. You'll find the legal demand inside." Harper had stopped walking. She stood frozen in the field watching. Midnight stepped protectively in front of her. Caleb took the folder, jaw clenched tight. "You can tell Wyatt Langston he's not setting foot on this property. We'll pass along your response, but I'd advise consulting your attorney. Quickly." The men left in silence, tires carving long grooves in the mud as they disappeared. That night, Caleb made a call to an old Army buddy who practiced law in Denver. The news wasn't good. The Mustang was tagged under Langston's name, the lawyer explained. If the papers weren't formally signed over, he technically still has a claim. And knowing Langston, this is about pride, not livestock. Caleb hung up and stared out at the pasture. Midnight grazed quietly, tail swishing. Harper was nowhere in sight. He found her later in the loft above the barn, curled into a pile of old horse blankets, sketchbook open. Her drawings were different now, rougher, darker, sharp lines and harsh shadows. She'd drawn a man's face twisted in anger, towering over a crumpled horse. Another showed a girl, tiny and voiceless, hands stretched toward a black stallion inside a cage. "Did he hurt you?" Caleb asked quietly, unsure what he meant, Langston or someone else. She didn't answer, but her fingers trembled on the page. Lena arrived the next morning, sensing the shift the moment she stepped out of her car. "What's going on?" she asked. Caleb filled her in, ending with a tired, bitter laugh. "He's trying to take the horse back now that it's worth something." Lena nodded grimly. "And Harper?" "She's not sleeping, drawing like something's chasing her." Lena went to find Harper in the paddock. The girl was walking slowly in a wide circle, Midnight matching her step for step. Lena didn't interrupt. She waited until they stopped, until Harper looked at her. "He's scared," Harper said softly. The words were barely audible, but they were there. Lena's heart swelled. "Who? Midnight?" Harper nodded once, then whispered, "Me too." That night, thunder rumbled again, not outside, but inside Harper's dreams. She cried out in her sleep, twisting in the sheets. Caleb rushed in, only to find her sitting upright, breathing hard, eyes wide, but not seeing. "Don't let go," she murmured. "Please. Stay." He didn't speak. He just sat beside her until her breathing slowed. In the morning, she handed him a new drawing. It showed her riding Midnight, no saddle, no bridle, inside an arena surrounded by people. At the bottom, she'd written 3 words in careful block letters. "We ride together." Langston wasn't finished. The following week, a small news crew showed up at the sanctuary's gate. "Mr. Winslow, would you care to comment on the Mustang's supposed miracle recovery under your granddaughter's care?" Caleb waved them off, but they stayed long enough to catch footage of Harper riding bareback at a walk inside the round pen. Midnight moved beneath her like he was born to carry her. The footage hit local airwaves that night, and the next morning, Langston filed for an injunction. Caleb slammed the phone down after the call from the county clerk. "He wants to drag her into court. A child. We can't let this go public," Lena warned. "She's just now starting to speak again." "We don't have a choice," Caleb muttered. "But we can take it to them on our terms." Lena raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we show them what they're trying to take, in front of everyone." The Colorado State Youth Equine Showcase was 6 weeks away. Lena pulled every string she had to get Harper and Midnight on the program. Caleb spent sleepless nights preparing the trailer, the paperwork, and the insurance. But Harper? She trained. Every morning and every afternoon, she worked with Midnight in the round pen. She didn't use words, only hand signals, posture, and presence. She rode without reins, guided with breath and balance. One afternoon, Lena watched Harper finish a perfect, bridleless circle around a set of barrels. She dismounted, landed softly in the dirt, and stroked Midnight's neck. Then she turned to Lena and said, clear and steady, "We're ready." The air shifted. They all felt it. That night, as the stars came out over Whisper Ridge, Caleb sat on the porch, Emily's journal in his lap. He read the final line she'd written before the crash. "There's a place inside every wounded animal that still believes in safety. Harper will find it. She already lives there." Tears burned behind his eyes. Inside, Harper slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Outside, Midnight stood beneath her window, unmoving, like a soldier on watch. And in 6 weeks, the world would see what trust, real trust, could become. The sun rose crisp and golden on the morning of the Colorado State Youth Equine Showcase. Whisper Ridge was quiet. The barn already swept, the trailer loaded. A fine layer of dust settled on the truck's windshield, disturbed only by Caleb's hand as he wiped it clean with his sleeve. He glanced toward the house, where Harper stood on the porch with her helmet tucked under one arm and her sketchbook clutched tight to her chest. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. She nodded once, her eyes steady. "All right," he said, voice soft. "Let's go show 'em what real healing looks like." The drive to Fort Collins was long but peaceful. Midnight rode quietly in the trailer, a far cry from the stallion who once kicked through steel. Harper sat beside Caleb in the cab, tracing invisible patterns on the glass with her finger. She didn't speak, but her calm said everything. At the fairgrounds, activity buzzed like a kicked-up anthill. Horses unloading, kids in matching team shirts rehearsing routines, handlers brushing coats to a high shine. Loudspeakers crackled announcements over the bustle. Caleb parked at the edge of the grounds, far from the noise, where Midnight could breathe. Harper opened the trailer and stood back. Midnight stepped down gently, head low, eyes flicking across the open space. She reached out not to pull him, but to invite him. He followed. Lena met them near the entry gate, clipboard in hand. "Harper," she greeted. "They slotted you second to last, prime time. You nervous?" Harper looked over at Midnight, then back at Lena. "Not if he's with me." Lena smiled. "He always is." Meanwhile, across the arena, Wyatt Langston stood in a pressed shirt and polished boots, holding court near a row of spotless show horses. His gelding, a high-dollar Palomino doped just enough to stay docile, stood with sleepy eyes, head dipped. "You really think that girl and that mangy Mustang are gonna show me up?" He snorted to a reporter from the local news. "Watch. When the pressure's on, that horse'll crack." Same as he always did. The reporter nodded, scribbling notes, but her eyes wandered toward the other end of the arena, where whispers about the mute girl and the wild stallion were spreading. The stands filled by late afternoon. Families waved at their kids, ranchers eyed bloodlines, and vendors sold popcorn and lemonade along the fence. Caleb stood beside Lena under the bleachers, trying not to chew through his own thumb. "She's calm," Lena said, watching Harper mount up behind the chute. "You should be, too." "I'm not worried about her," Caleb muttered. "I'm worried about the world." A voice echoed over the loudspeaker. Next up, rider number 22, Harper Winslow, age 10, riding Midnight. A hush fell over the arena. The gates opened. Harper entered at a walk, no reins, no bridle, her posture straight but relaxed. Midnight moved with slow, deliberate steps, his ears tuned only to her. The crowd murmured, unsure of what they were seeing. No music, no handler, no commands, just a girl and her horse. She guided him through a figure 8 using her seat and breath. Midnight responded as though he could hear her thoughts. They circled barrels without touching them, weaved between cones, paused in perfect sync. Then Harper turned to face the crowd. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her harmonica, a small silver thing that once belonged to her mother. She raised it to her lips and played a single, haunting melody. Midnight stood motionless, ears forward. Then, as if drawn by something older than memory, he stepped forward, bowed his head, and knelt on one leg. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Harper dismounted slowly, kissed the side of his neck, and turned toward the judges. She stepped up to the microphone, voice shaking but strong. He wasn't broken. He was just waiting for someone to see him. The arena was silent for a breath, then erupted into applause. Cameras flashed. People rose to their feet. Caleb stood frozen under the bleachers, tears caught in the corners of his eyes. "She did it," he whispered. "She really did it." Lena squeezed his arm. They both did. But Wyatt wasn't finished. As the crowd began to settle, the loudspeaker crackled again. "Final exhibition. Wyatt Langston and Gold Dancer." Langston strode into the ring with an exaggerated wave. His gelding, ears pinned and sluggish, dragged his feet. Wyatt kicked him hard to get him moving, then cracked the reins for show. "Now this," he announced, "is what a real trained horse looks like." He barked commands. The gelding trotted in half-hearted circles, flinching under the sharp bit. Wyatt pulled him into a sliding stop, then turned to the crowd with a smug grin. And then, a pop. Not loud, not intentional, just the sound of a balloon bursting in the crowd. The gelding spooked. He bucked, reared, bolted toward the fence. Wyatt barely stayed on. The crowd screamed, scattering. Caleb and Lena sprinted forward, but it was Harper who acted first. She stepped into the ring, calm and focused. Midnight was right behind her. She raised a hand, not at the frightened gelding, but at midnight. He stepped forward, slow and sure, placing himself between the panicked horse and the fence line. Then something remarkable happened. The gelding stopped. He stared at midnight. Then, like a switch flipping, he lowered his head and let out a long breath. The arena went quiet. Wyatt slid off, red-faced and panting. He tried to speak, but the mic had already been turned off. That evening, just before sunset, a state representative found Caleb near the horse trailer. "I've seen a lot of horses in my day," the man said, "but I've never seen anything like that." He handed Caleb a card. "We'd like to invite Whisper Ridge to lead a pilot program, equine therapy for trauma recovery. Your granddaughter and that horse, they might just change everything." Caleb looked down at the card, then back toward the arena, where Harper leaned her forehead against Midnight's. "They already have," he said. The snow melted slowly that spring, revealing soft green beneath the thawing fields of Whisper Ridge. The mountains still wore white caps in the distance, but in the low pastures, new life was already unfolding. Foals kicking their long legs into the wind, daffodils pushing through the warming earth, and laughter returning to a place that once only knew silence. Harper sat beneath the cottonwood near Midnight's paddock, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. She wasn't drawing the horse today. Instead, she sketched the barn, the new fencing, the renovated stalls, all of it part of the expansion made possible by the grant Whisper Ridge had received after the state showcase. Her hair was longer now, and her voice, though still soft, came easily when she spoke. Caleb watched her from the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, the other resting on his knee. His joints ached more these days, but his spirit was lighter. He'd spent most of his life managing animals, fixing fences, and avoiding the past. Now he found himself welcoming people, answering questions from journalists, and working beside children whose pain mirrored the quiet that once haunted Harper's eyes. She was the one who'd changed everything. Her and that wild black Mustang. Midnight stood nearby, grazing peacefully. No halter, no saddle, no rope. Just freedom. Inside the barn, Lena Carter directed a group of new volunteers, helping a boy named Mason learn how to brush a nervous palomino named Bree. Mason had arrived a week earlier, 9 years old, withdrawn, and fresh from a foster home that hadn't worked out. He barely spoke, flinched at sudden movement, and clung to a small, worn-out, stuffed dog he kept in his coat pocket. Today, he was brushing Bree's flank with slow, careful strokes. Harper had paired them herself. "He doesn't need anyone to talk to him," she'd told Lena. "He just needs something that won't leave." The sanctuary had changed. It wasn't just a place for unwanted horses anymore. It was a safe haven for wounded kids, grieving families, and anyone learning to trust again. Caleb called it a second chance. Lena called it a revolution in healing. Harper just called it home. One afternoon, as golden light spilled across the fields, Caleb opened an envelope postmarked from a Denver hospice facility. Inside was a letter in shaky handwriting, addressed to Harper Winslow and family. The signature at the bottom made Caleb sit down fast. Wyatt Langston. He didn't expect forgiveness, the letter said. But he wanted Harper to know he'd watched her ride that horse at the showcase. He hadn't understood it then, but he did now. Watching them together cracked something open inside him. Regret, maybe, or sorrow, maybe both. He wrote that he'd left his remaining land to a local conservation trust, and he included a check, small but meaningful, with instructions that it be used to feed the horses. Harper read it quietly and didn't say much. She folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer next to her harmonica. He was hurting too, she said later to Caleb. "People who hurt animals, they don't start that way." Caleb didn't argue. He just placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded. By early summer, the sanctuary's first therapy program officially launched. Children came from all across the state, some through hospitals, others through outreach centers. Most arrived broken in ways too deep for words, and yet somehow the horses understood them. Midnight, most of all. He'd become something of a legend, not just for what he'd survived, but for how he chose to stay soft despite it. He let children feed him from open palms, walk beside him on halter-free strolls, and even rest their heads against his shoulder when the days grew too heavy. Harper became the youngest mentor in the program. She didn't follow lesson plans or teaching manuals. She simply paid attention. She listened. And when words weren't enough, she handed kids pencils and sketchbooks and said, "Try this." The approach worked. Kids who hadn't spoken in months began drawing first, and then, eventually, they started talking. Caleb marveled at it all. Sometimes he stood by the new Welcome Center, once a tool shed, now outfitted with chairs, books, and art supplies, and just watched. He swore he could feel Emily's presence in the wind, as if she were walking beside him. One evening, he took out her old journal and finally finished reading the last page. "Don't teach her to be strong by being hard. Let her be strong by staying soft. Give her horses, and she'll give you a world you never knew you were missing." He closed the book and wiped his eyes. Later that week, a new girl arrived, 7 years old, freckle-faced, silent. Her name was Rosie. She clung to a social worker's sleeve, eyes wide and wary. She hadn't spoken since her brother died in a house fire 6 months earlier. Harper met her at the gate, midnight, grazing nearby. She knelt to Rosie's level and said gently, "I used to be quiet too." Rosie didn't look at her. Harper extended a sketchbook and a pencil. "Start here," she said. Rosie took them slowly and nodded. She didn't smile, but her grip on the sketchbook tightened with purpose. That evening, Caleb sat in his old rocking chair on the porch. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting the sky in hues of gold and lavender. He watched Harper walk the fence line with Rosie, midnight trailing behind them like a silent guardian. Lena joined him, handing him a glass of iced tea. "Think Emily would be proud?" she asked. Caleb didn't speak right away. His eyes were too full. Finally, he whispered, "She'd say this is exactly what she dreamed of." As darkness settled over Whisper Ridge, the lights of the sanctuary flicked on one by one. Horses shifted in their stalls, children laughed inside the bunkhouse, and the silence that once hung heavy now felt full, like a lullaby waiting to be heard. And under the moonlight, Midnight stood beneath Harper's window just as he always had. Not guarding, not protecting, just belonging.